Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome back to the Second Bite Podcast. Jeff King from Barkley is with me today. And this, I think, is going to be a really interesting podcast with a lot to unpack in this episode. But Jeff, I'm super happy that you could join me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Todd. I appreciate it.
You know, I am always impressed, I guess is the right word, in a circumstance where a guy starts as an intern somewhere and a couple decades later is the CEO. But that is your story. I know there was a gap in between, but can you tell me, why don't we take it a step back? First, from an introduction standpoint, tell me who Barkley is, what do you do, and who do you do it for? And then maybe we could do a little bit of the Jeff King journey and how you got to being the boss at a place like Barkley.
Sure. So Barkley, we are one of the largest independent agencies in the country, advertising marketing services. And we serve middle market brands, brands like Planet Fitness, Dairy Queen, US Bank, brands like that. So for the most part, we get hired as a primary lead agency, meaning clients hire us to help define their core brand idea, the core brand positioning, and then steward that brand through brand communications. What we really focus on is what we call whole brand thinking. We believe that a brand is the sum parts of everything a company does, both internally and externally. So while the legacy side of our business is really about marketing communications, we also are very consultative with our clients on their internal practices, everything from product development and design to their internal culture practices, to their sustainability practices.
How does somebody like Barkley earn the right to be that advisor at that level to those companies?
I mean, it starts with a lot of strategic rigor. So we have a very deep strategy practice that rivals consultancy in terms of the talent that we have in the building and the research capabilities that we have. And so, at our core, what we do is really study humans. We have a big insight and publishing practice around understanding modern consumers and modern consumer trends. That's the foundation for it. And then we have a really deep research and strategy team that can do our clients' businesses and brands and gains a deep understanding of their consumers, so that when we come and ideate and bring recommendations, it's rooted in sound fundamentals.
And Barkley, by the way, is a sizable business. Can you describe that either by revenue or headcount or whatever you're comfortable with?
Yeah, we have about 500 people across 4 offices in the U.S. We are primarily U.S. based in our practice, and we do about $100 million in revenue a year.
And you know what else is interesting? You guys are a B corporation, and I'm not even sure I fully Can you tell me 2 things? Number 1, what does that mean? And number 2, what's the reason behind doing that?
So B Lab is a third party that has a certification program for companies, and that's how you become a B Corp. And so what that basically means, and it's not specific to our industry, as you know, it spans all categories. But what that means is they are measuring companies on a whole slew of criteria to make sure those companies are meeting the highest standards of how they treat people, how they behave in the community, and environmental factors. And so it's a certification process that happens. We have to recertify every 3 years. It's highly regulated and rigorous. But it holds us accountable to ourselves in terms of our business practices. The reason that we did it was really twofold. One, we are in the talent business. And so agencies who acquire and retain the best talent win. And people want to work for companies that are giving back and adding good to the world. We believe that. So most importantly, it's a part of our culture. We believe that being a B Corp helps us attract better people and retain our people. Secondly, I talked a little bit about our philosophy on how we help brands. We work with brands both on their external communications, but also their internal practices. So when we go to a client and talk to them about how they treat their employees, what their internal culture practices are, or more importantly, what their sustainability policies and practices are, we got to walk the walk. So going through that process ourselves, B Corp, gives us a lot of experience, knowledge, and rigor around how we approach that.
That's great. And so you were literally an intern at Barkley, and then you left, and then you came back. And so what has your journey been like to rise the ranks of Barkley?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my goal, my career goal was to be an advertising executive. So I went to journalism school at the University of Missouri and got an advertising degree. And I started as an intern at Barkley on the account service side of the business. So essentially, selling in work and working with clients on their marketing strategies, and then working with our internal teams across all disciplines to bring ideas to life for those clients. I loved that. I never really aspired to run the business, but that's what ended up happening. Many years later, so I started an account service at Barkley. I left for a few years. I worked at a big holding company agency based in Austin. Then I worked for another small boutique agency in Atlanta that was ultimately acquired by a holding company. And I really felt like I fit much better at an independent agency, one that was entrepreneurial, nimble, highly creative. And so I ended up coming back to Barkley, and I've been here ever since. So it's been, in total, if you count the first stint and the second stint, I've been here almost 30 years.
And so I know you guys are very thoughtful, not only in what you do for clients, but how you operate the business in kind of some of the ways we discussed. So about a year ago, you did a transaction with a very good private equity group out of Chicago called Keystone. I'd like to unpack that a little bit, maybe in two ways. The first way, I'd like to hear a little bit about how does the idea bubble up of, hey, we should partner with private equity? Was it because you had aspirations of being something and you needed help to do that? Was it because your founders were getting older and they needed liquidity? What were some of the factors that impacted your decision?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our founders have already exited the business. We were founded in 1964, so the company's been around 60 years this year. And the current leadership team has a lot of road ahead of us. So it wasn't about an exit at all. What it really is about, I guess the most succinct way I can talk about it is, we are in a rare position being an independent at scale in our industry. So if you think about the advertising industry, and I'm going to overgeneralize to make the point, but there are 13,000 ad agencies in the United States, and most of those fall into one of two categories. You have the big multinational holding company held agencies on one end of the spectrum, and on the other end, you have a lot of very entrepreneurial, highly creative boutique type agencies. And where we find ourselves with 500 employees and 100 million in revenue is in the middle, where we have a lot of the characteristics of the independent agencies in terms of our nimbleness, our entrepreneurial spirit, our creativity. And we are competing more and more and more with the holding company agencies because of our scale, who really excel at data and analytics and sophistication from a technology standpoint, and investment in emerging areas of the business like AI. And so, everything we've done for the past 60 years has been self-funded. And as we get into, and we've done a really good job of keeping up, but as the business and the world and technology in areas like media and performance marketing continue to accelerate at a really rapid pace, we felt like we needed some outside capital and expertise to help us continue to compete.
So what I'm used to is one or two, maybe three founders kind of come to that conclusion on their own. was your ownership group and your management team, was it larger? And how did that conversation evolve?
So we have a shareholder team that was 15 people. So myself,
and do they all work in the business?
All work in the business. So myself and my primary partner, so I'm president, and my partner Dan Fromm I'm CEO. My partner Dan Fromm is president, and he and I run essentially as managing partners. And we have a leadership team, that reports up to the two of us. And we've brought that team along the entire journey. So from the first time Dan and I started talking about going down this path, which was probably now almost 3 years ago, we had an offsite. We started talking to that group about the long-term vision for the company, where we wanted to take it, where our opportunities were, where our challenges were, and different ways that we might get there. So they've been a part of the journey the entire way, which we felt was really important because, there's a lot of people in the organization. The day we announced that we had taken on a private equity partner, it was certainly a surprise to a lot of people, but it could not be a surprise to the most important people who are driving the business, and they've been a part of it all along.
Was it a question to them like, hey, here's our route forward, here's where we need to go? We can either stay independent, fund it out of our own pockets and go slower, or we can take some chips off the table, get a seasoned, experienced partner and go faster? Or did you just say to them, hey, we need to go get a partner and this is what we're going to do and we want you to be involved in that process?
It was a thoughtful discussion around what you just talked about, looking at, but not only those two kind of binary options, but we actually, the first thing we did was we hired a strategic consultant to come in and look at all the alternatives that we could take. So we looked at everything from status quo to selling the company outright to a strategic and everything in between, which included recapitalizing the company and maximizing what we could borrow to get a lot more aggressive in that regard, to taking on an equity partner, to selling outright. We looked at all those options. And ultimately, what we felt was going to be best for the shareholder group as a whole, and the culture of the agency overall, was to do what we did, which was take on a really thoughtful, really strategic private equity partner.
What came from those choices you had? What came in second place?
It would have been recapping, be more aggressive with debt, and doing it ourselves. That probably would have been second.
Which is a big difference, right? Because now you get a several million on the balance sheet, and was it a clear-cut decision for everybody? Private equity is a better way to go?
I will say now it is, now that we've found our partner that we feel really, really good about.
Yeah.
I would say going through the process when we were dating, so to speak, multiple different private equity partners. There were partners, and this is no disrespect to any of them, but there were partners we met that just did not feel like a culture fit, did not feel like it would be a good relationship or partnership. Those were times when we questioned what we were doing strategically. But then when we sat down and talked with people like Keystone, we felt great about what we were doing.
I think it's interesting because do you have any sense of so now you started, okay, so this is what we're going to do. We got to start interviewing private equity groups. How many do you think you spoke to?
Well, we started by hiring a banker representative. And so that process took a few months of looking at people who...
Pick a banker.
Pardon me?
To pick a banker to partner with.
Yeah, it took a few months to pick a banker. We, looked at, investment banking firms that had good expertise in our industry, that had good contacts. Because I didn't know the private equity world at all. I probably, when we started this process, I probably could not have named 5 private equity firms, by name.
Yeah.
So we needed the right guidance and expertise. And we went through a good, thoughtful process and ended up hiring Canaccord Genuity. And they were really good partners. Obviously, they had deep contacts. So back to your question of how many do I think we met with, one of the first things that we did when we started working with Canaccord was we went to an event that they held which is like a speed dating event between potential investors and company representatives that they bring in. And so in a day and a half, I think we had 20 meetings right out of the gate. And that was such an incredible learning experience because we went in to tell our story the way we typically tell our story when we're, presenting ourselves to prospective clients. And what I quickly found out is, there's some of that that's relevant, but the investors are like
a little different.
It's a different story. And so just doing that rapid fire of meeting after meeting after meeting, and Dan and I were the two in the room. And after each meeting, we'd have like 3 minutes until the next one. And we'd quickly talk about what we wanted to refine in terms of what we wanted to talk about, what we wanted to emphasize more, where we needed to provide more detail, less detail. And so by the time we got out of that day and a half, it was huge in terms of how it helped us start to coalesce the story.
And it's different just because of the audience, right? They're the things that they're curious about and want to know are metrics on the business and some other things of that nature, as opposed to how you do what you do.
That's right. And my background is, as I mentioned, I went to journalism school, I have an advertising degree. My entire career has been built around understanding brands, consumer behavior, and developing marketing strategy. And now I'm in this world where I'm representing a company and talking to, people from the financial world. And in some regards, they're different languages a little bit.
They sure are. And do you feel like you have a better grasp on your industry and your competitors now that you've spoken to all the groups that you have?
Yeah, Todd, that's a great question. I think that was a big benefit of going through the process that I never even thought about, is it helps you assess your own business, be super honest about your strengths and your weaknesses, because those get pointed out very bluntly and quickly in this process.
Yes, they do.
And understand the context of the industry. So again, going back to where I was oversimplifying in terms of talking about holding companies and independents, really help you understand what your place is in the industry in a way that you didn't before. So if I had gone through the process and there had been no outcome, it still would have been a very valuable learning experience for me and for my partners, for sure.
I say that to folks all the time, that for a small engagement fee, as I say it, the only reason we won't do a transaction is because you don't get the value you thought. If we don't get the value you thought, you will know very, very specifically the 2 or 3 reasons why. And so if you're going to work very hard on your business over the next couple of years, at least you know the 2 or 3 factors that are going to impact your valuation more than anything else. And I think you understand where you fit in the ecosystem of the market that you serve. And that is also incredibly valuable. It's probably, if you can get these guys with checkbooks and understanding of the industry who don't care about your feelings to be brutally honest with you, which they're happy to do, it is the greatest consulting you could possibly get, right?
It really is. And you're right. Like we met, you asked me how many we met with. So we had the 20 in that initial and probably 30, 40, 50 more meetings over the course of almost 12 months. So, met with dozens and dozens of different types of firms, and there were lots of great people. So I don't want to miss her, but you're right. There is not time to sugarcoat, to express a lot of nicety. Like, you've got to get to it quickly to know whether you want to continue chatting. I will tell you, maybe you were going to go here in the conversation, but I will tell you one of the things that differentiated who we ended up going with the most was some of what we're talking about. I mean, their interest in our business, how we do what we do, the product, the leadership, our process. They went much deeper on that. So many private equities partners that we met with were really over-indexed in terms of their interest on the financial model and less about what's driving that financial model.
Yeah. It's interesting. So here's what I see oftentimes. You go through this process, or we take a client through this process, and maybe you had this experience, but there's probably, let's call it the finals, there's 3 or 4 or 5 that are, I would say, equal. And then it kind of gets down to who do we feel most comfortable with? Is that accurate? Or I should say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important at the end of the day was the economics? Not that they're not important, but was there a big significant difference between the group that made it to the finals?
We did not go with the highest bidder. It was critically important to us that we had the right partnership going forward. I think the culture fit was it trumped money in a big way, and it was really critical. And you're exactly right. For us, it was, I think we had 4 to 5 finalists that we were evaluating, and they all looked and felt different. The money was all in a range for sure, but there was the Keystone, the partner that we went with, they clearly differentiated themselves.
And what was it with them that differentiated themselves?
So I said this earlier, and I think I'll go a little deeper on it. Most of the partners we talked about really dug into the financial model. How do we make money? How do we drive revenue? How do we drive sales? What do the margins look like? What's the opportunity to drive more revenue, to increase margin? Keystone cared a lot about the work product, about the quality of the leadership that we had in place. They spent a lot of time talking with our different discipline leads and key leaders throughout the organization. They cared about the process of how we get to the work that we produce. They cared about the quality of the relationships that we have with our clients. Who on the client side do we have those relationships with, et cetera? When so many, and I've always had a philosophy, like, as long as we've run the company, Dan and I, we have budgets every year, but we've never stated financial goals. It's never been our goal to have X in revenue and X in, our goal has always been to take care of our people and do really good work. And we feel like if that's what we continue to stay focused on, then financial outcomes follow. And so when we got into these private equity conversations, the way Keystone approached it with, let's understand the work, and then let's also talk about what the financial outcomes of the work you do is, as opposed to the reverse. And that was meaningful to us.
And did all 15 of the owners, when you started the process, are they all still with the company?
Yes.
Interesting. The other question I had, as it relates to the process with Keystone, I find a lot of times when we get started with people have a picture in their mind. I'm going to stay for a year. I'm going to do this. Did you have different assessments that, man, if we partner with those guys, I'm not going to roll forward as much, or I don't think I'm going to stay, or I don't know if it's going to be fun. For your personal experience, did you kind of go through that roller coaster of emotion along the way?
I did. And there were times in the process where I thought, I just want to get through this process and be done. That was never the goal. I will just tell you, I just felt that way at certain times. The goal was always to find a partner that was going to take, investment in the company, but us still roll forward and have skin in the game. That was always the plan, and that's where we ended up. We are a people-based business, and so nobody's going to invest in us unless the people are committed, and we are. And so, yes, while I had that feeling from time to time, it was never a real consideration that we were going to sell out, 100% to a strategic and walk away. We're in this for the next phase. And I couldn't be more excited. I feel like I have a new job. I was talking to my wife about that. She said,
after 20 years.
Yeah. She's like, you seem more energized than you have about work in a long time. And I'm like, I am. I mean, part of it is because I learned so much through the process. I went from somebody who was a marketing practitioner to really a different understanding of business and finance and corporate development. And so now working alongside Keystone on the business in a way that I never did before is really fascinating. It's fun and it's exhilarating.
And all of your growth over the years has been organic.
Yeah.
I know
we've done some small acquisitions,
and that's part of your playbook going forward, correct?
Yeah. So we have, we have a pretty clear strategy moving forward. We're going to continue to invest, and it won't all be through acquisition. There'll still be organic growth. There's going to be key talent acquisition. There will be company acquisition, areas of the business that we want to strengthen, particularly as I talked about around data analytics, performance. Those are all practice areas we have in the company now that we've built ourselves organically, again, with our own investment. Now to accelerate the development of those through acquisitions and through talent is, really exciting.
And for you on a personal level, it's something you haven't done probably to the degree with the sophistication and rigor that you have. Is that also exciting?
Yes. The partnership, like having Keystone as a partner to go in and help us analyze potential acquisitions, and the way they do it and the rigor with which they do it and the sophistication is just, night and day from when we were, adding on small acquisitions ourselves.
Does it make you look back on those and say, oh my God, I can't believe we lucked out because they turned out well?
Yeah. Yes. And it makes me somewhat proud that we were able to get through it on our own. It makes me feel like super lucky that there's so many things that we probably could have screwed up that we didn't.
And I say that often. There's a reason why private equity wins all the time, or a vast majority of the time, is because they've been down the road before, but they're very strategic and considered and logical and disciplined when it comes to diligence and M&A and search and all the things that they do to make a good fit work.
Well, I feel like, yeah. And the way I talked to my partner about it, I'm like, it feels like we now have adults in the room with us when we're looking at these companies.
So now that because you did your transaction with Keystone 4 or 5 months ago?
Yes. End of September. Yeah.
So when you look back on that, what was the biggest surprise that you learned along the way? And what were what were you most surprised by?
By the transaction itself?
Either that or the process or, any of that.
I knew it would take a lot of time, but it takes a lot of time. So I think.
And how did you allocate? Because you're running the business. How do you allocate? And last thing you can do is have revenue and profits fall off while you're going through this. How did you guys divide and conquer that?
So I talk about that group of 15. What was really helpful, so the fact that everybody was in the loop, the fact that everybody had full knowledge of every step along the way, allowed Dan and I to really delegate a lot of the running of the day-to-day business to that leadership group. And they knew we were distracted. They knew that we were going to be spending a lot of time on the road, a lot of time in these meetings. And, that if we'd had to make excuses, if they weren't in the loop and we were trying to do this under cloak and dagger, it would have been extremely difficult. So I would say we divided and conquered. Dan and I really focused on this process and spent an inordinate amount of time on it. And we tried to keep, while everybody else we kept informed, we kept them focused on our business development and the work we're doing for our clients day in, day out.
So, one of the questions that always comes up, let's talk about somebody a half or a third of your size. One of the questions that always comes up is, geez, I'm not sure when I should tell my people.
Early and often is my
how many?
Advice.
How many of those people? How do you make the distinction of who to tell and who not to?
Well, at first, I guess I have a strong point of view about that. We're a very transparent culture. I have a philosophy that when in the absence of information, people fill in the gaps with things that are typically far worse than whatever the truth is.
Right.
And so you can't go into this process and have people not notice. And you're naive if you think that you can.
That's great advice.
So when you're able, I would say as soon as you start down the path, as soon as you start going into meetings and getting into the process in a real way, you got to let your direct reports, your key lieutenants know. I mean, every organization is different. In our case, it just so happened that almost everybody who reported to either me or Dan was also a shareholder.
Right.
And so there was a dual reason that we wanted to keep everybody informed. Out of respect for the fact they were a shareholder was a big part of it, even though Dan and I controlled the voting shares. But because of what I just described in terms of the need to delegate leadership responsibilities and to that group as well. But then we started bringing in people beyond that pretty early as well, to help us develop communications, to help us anticipate what people were going to have anxiety around and how we wanted to address it from a comms and policy standpoint and things like that. So the circle got fairly wide. I think that the fear everybody always has is the news is going to get out there before we're ready for it to. And my philosophy is, people were talking about it to some degree. The thing that we kept caveating it with was it may or may not happen. There are lots of people who go into this process, lots of companies, and at the end, just like we talked about earlier, they learn a lot, but they don't end up actually going through with whatever they were considering. And that will be fine too. We're a good, healthy, strong company that's doing great. And if we go through this and we learn a whole bunch about ourselves and end up in a status quo position, that's fine. So as long as everybody goes into it with that understanding, I just feel like, bringing your key people in as early is critical.
I think that's a great piece of advice. As we wind down here in our last few minutes, is there one or two other pieces of advice for somebody that's going to, whether it's to partner with private equity or test the markets or look for a transaction? Is there something that you would say, man, make sure you do this?
Don't let money drive 100% of your decision. I mean, I know it's easy to say when you still have a good outcome. But I just think that if you go in thinking it's the highest bidder or nothing, I just feel like you can end up pretty miserable.
It's also, for people that are really looking for a second bite, economics are an important criteria, but it's I will say that when I look at many of the folks we've had on the podcast and others that we have done and others have done that are most happy with their transaction post-close, it wasn't the highest bidder.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, and my job satisfaction, as I talked about, is as high as it's been in a long time, which I never expected. And, I remember going to the process, my wife said, I don't care how much the company gets valued at in this first step, just make sure that it's enough that if you're miserable, a year later or 6 months later, you're fine. We're fine with you walking away.
Yeah.
And I think so. We kind of went into it, that mentality of it may not be as fun anymore. I may not have the same job satisfaction. But the opposite's been true. And I think that should be a big part of your criteria when you're looking at partners. Is this somebody that
I'm sorry, finish that first.
Is this going to be somebody I enjoy working with day in, day out? Because I'm talking to Bill at Keystone every day.
And you knew that, you felt that comfortable with the transaction before close. There was no surprises like, wow, this is better than I thought it would be. The reason you closed with Keystone is because you were certain that you had the right partner.
I believed that was going to be the case. You never really know. Is somebody after the close going to be as genuine and thoughtful as they were when they were trying to sell you on themselves? And I would say in this case, it's every bit as much so.
Yeah. And, It's interesting at Keystone, and I think you're aware of this, but they have a big chunk of the partners' money in their funds.
Yeah, that was meaningful.
And it is telling, I will say this, number one. But number two, it is, rule number one in private equity is don't burn money, right? Don't light a big pile of money on fire. And I think the easiest way to do that is to get a great platform company like this and then tell them things to get them to close that won't be true post-close, because that just disrupts. And I think the best buyers, probably the 4 or 5 that you got into your final group, would probably all have been the same. It's great when you can find that personality match with good, solid people like Bill and the rest of the team at Keystone really is.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, life's too short to work with people that bring you unhappiness and misery.
And I also think a big part of the reason that you attracted the people you did is because of the company you built. And I'm sure there's a whole layer of reasons for why you have the company you built, starting with things like you do with the B company or the B corporation, and the way you treat people and the way you inform people and the open culture and all of those things. I don't think any of what has occurred for Barkley has been by accident, right? And it's great to see guys that do it the right way, so to speak, get the right results and partner with the right people. And I will say, Jeff, it'll be great to watch how you guys do acquisitions. It'll be great to watch how the business grows. And maybe, I know you're just getting started, but maybe in 4 or 5, 6, 7 years, we'll have you back on and you can do a recap for how well the second bite went and how exciting the road down over those years was.
Well, I appreciate that. It was fun to talk about. And it's been, again, a great learning experience. And I appreciate you having me.
Well, it's super generous for you to share and share as openly as you have. So, Jeff, thank you very much. Jeff King, all contact information will be in the show notes. You can find Jeff on LinkedIn. It's hard to get to Jeff because he's very busy, but there's a team there and on from that standpoint. So, Jeff, again, thanks a ton.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.